Next up, we're going to get into genetics. We got Rick Novak from CSU, one of the top kind of guys in the whole genetics side of things and in the hemp industry in the country now. So Rick, come on up, and then after that, we're going to get into a panel with several other folks.
Okay. Well, I thank you for the offer to come and speak today. My name is Rick Novak. I'm the Director of Seed Programs within the Soil and Crop Sciences at Colorado State University. So, first of all, I'd like to have a disclaimer. My disclaimer is I could talk about this for an hour, hour and a half, but I have 15 minutes. So, my disclaimer is I'm not going to cover everything, okay? So, let's do a little bit of history on why I was involved. I got involved with the hemp industry, actually out of an invite from the Department of Agriculture. And I can point out Terry Moran in the audience, as he was one of the instrumental people, along with Maureen West and Laura Podorf and Dwayne Sinning within that regulatory system. What they wanted to discuss, and I went to a few conferences early on, was that there's a lot of people that want to raise industrial hemp, but are scared, they're nervous because of that three-letter word. So, we want to try to help this industry, to help this crop, and that's why I got involved, because as within my seed programs, we have the Colorado Seed Growers Association, which was established by the Legislative Assembly in 1929 for specifically certification of crops, okay? So when we're talking about certification of crops, and we'll talk about industrial hemp and the genetics that make up that, that is the reason that seed certification come into play, is because in the early part of the century, when the universities were established around the U.S. by Congress as land-grant universities with breeders in place, there was no method of maintaining genetic purity over time and subsequent generations. So varieties would go out into the marketplace, there was no protection, so oat variety or barley variety or wheat variety get developed, and in 3 years it was all lost its identity. And so with improved genetics, they needed a way of maintaining genetics for farmers, and that's what seed certification does for industrial hemp. So we looked at seed certification. In Colorado, we were the first in our group of seed certification agencies around the world, outside of Canada, to look at how can we get varieties, how can we get seed certification working with industrial hemp. So working with the Department of Agriculture, we instituted a plan that mirrors what's done with other crops. So you can, as a breeding company, get your hemp variety into seed certification, but there is a process, and the process is not easy, it's not simple, but there is a process, and the outcome of the process is that reliability of genetics to the consumer, to the farmer, it's being withheld. So I wanted to go over a couple of things today, especially of what a plant breeder does, or what they need to do when they breed a crop. Because I have had a number of phone calls that said, I have the good stuff, I have a good one. And so having and developing a reliable variety is more than just words. So plant breeding objectives really begin with germplasm. So a real plant breeder, anybody that's plant breeding, will bring as much veritable population into their fold to work with, to make crosses with. And out of that, they'll select specific genotypes that they would want to use in their population to obtain their goals. Maybe it's a high CBD, maybe it's a short plant, maybe it's an early season plant, or maybe it's one that has good seed quality, or maybe emergence quality. So these qualities could be genotypes, they could be specific characteristics that a breeder looks for. So during their selection plan and evaluation, they will plant in different locations and different environments so that they understand what the genotype that they're looking for is there. If there's diseases, they're screening for that, they're screening for insects, they're screening for emergence, maturity, all of these things. And once they achieve reliable, consistent performing genotype, then they can advance that forward. And that's where seed certification comes into play. And it's not with only hemp. It's done with wheat, it's done with barley, it's done with oats, it's done with alfalfa, it's done with a lot of grasses even. So that's where we have tried to work industrial hemp. And Colorado is the only state, as I said before, but we have worked with our national organization, and we are creating a national level of variety review for seed certification that will be adaptable around the U.S. and hopefully around the world. So we're trying to move this crop forward, and with the use of seed certification, that legitimizes and makes it more of a recognizable process for farmers and consumers as they purchase plants and crops. So I was also invited, when I've heard earlier talking about Department of Agriculture and the rulemaking process, I was invited in the middle of May to speak to employees at USDA that are in the rulemaking process about seed certification, the importance of seed certification, and the problems we see if it's not followed. And so that was very well received. I understand the rulemaking process will go on for another couple of months, but we'll have some rules that will be coming out of USDA that will be applicable not only to Colorado but to other states, to moving this industry forward. What I did want to talk about was one problem that we have seen come out, especially this year. So I also oversee the Colorado Seed Lab that does genetic, we do germination testing and viability testing of hemp seed. And what we have found was that there are certain samples, certain lots where there's a certain amount of dormant seed. Okay, so the seed is tested. The seed is tested by established rules by lab analysts. They have a national organization that has been in existence for, I don't know, close to 70, 80 years. And they have established rules for every crop. How much water goes onto it, how long the seed is put into a germination unit, and then what the temperature is held at, what the seed come out, when it comes out, what it looks like. Does it have a root and shoot on it? Does it have all the essential plants to make a normal plant? So we are finding samples that have a certain level of dormancy. So people may say, what is dormancy? Well, dormancy is actually the plant's ability to withstand extreme environmental conditions. You will see that. I can relate it to other crops. We have one that's another annual crop, and what makes it really unusual is cannabis sativa is an annual crop. So why does that? What happens? What's going on? So professionals aren't really sure what's going on, but we do see it in a crop called rye. All of you have seen or heard of feral rye. So it shows up every year, but it does have a level of dormancy, because if you planted it, it'll keep coming back for 7, 8 years. So it'll always keep coming. Native plants have a certain level of dormancy. There are ways to test for dormancy. So the seed that doesn't germinate can be soaked in a tetrazolium solution. It's cut open, and the live tissue is identified. It's not dead. It's just not going to germinate immediately, maybe. It may come up this week, may come up next week, may come up the following week, may come up next year. So it's just not ready to germinate. And when environmental conditions are perfect, it will germinate. So I wanted to point out that that is one point, that maybe some of you have heard about, seed dormancy, that is a natural phenomena for seed. And we have found that in this crop. And you won't find it in wheat or barley or oats or any of those crops because it's been bred out. It's been selected out. And that's where moving this crop forward with seed certification and breeding practices that produce reliable, stable varieties is important. It's not as important for me, but it's important for you as a grower. Because when you buy seed, you plant it, you have expectations. And so to meet those expectations. Also the reliability, that seed certification, because seed certification is really a third-party verification of each generation, where your plant comes from, and the seed sources, and they've all been tested and checked for consistency, plant structure, phenotypes, all of that. That's what we do. So for industrial hemp, when we go to the field, when we're doing a field inspection, we're looking for true to type. Is every plant about the same? Is it consistent from one end of the field to the other? And that's what our observations are based on. With industrial hemp, we do 2 inspections. There's a first inspection occurs once the males have started to shed pollen and the females are not receptive. The second one is done 3 weeks later. Then at that point, then we look at true to type. We look for any abnormalities, and we also, look for noxious weeds. So with that, I'll be available. I have a few cards in my pocket. You can find me on the internet at Colorado Seed Programs. So